العالمين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا أبو القاسم المصطفى محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآله
وصلى اللهم على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين. قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه العزيز: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولله المشرق والمغرب فأينما تولوا فثم وجه الله. صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد. Just as a summary of the discussion points from last night's lecture, I started off the discussion of this Muharram, this Ashar series of lectures, to talk about the idea of the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the first question that comes to mind is, what is existence? And what was discussed were different philosophical views regarding existence, including Descartes, John Locke, and the Islamic view of the existence in general and the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in specific. Continuing in that vein, I want to talk now about certain concepts within the idea of the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Namely, when we say that if existence is a part of Allah, then what does that mean? In the world of Irfan, they threw out some mystical terminologies, saying, for example, that Allah is wahdatul wujud, meaning that He is the unity of being, or He is wajib al-wujud, meaning He is the necessarily existence. And then there is the mumkin al-wujud, which is the contingent existence. But then we still have to understand what existence is. But when we talk about existence, I have to understand that existence itself is a secondary characteristic of the being that cannot be separated from the being itself. When I said this yesterday as well, if you think of Safi, Haider, you think of somebody in this cloak, this turban, this abba, and automatically somebody sitting on the mimbar comes to mind. You can separate this abba from my body, from my being, but you cannot separate existence from the being. Because the second that I think of existence or something, I think of its being there. There is a paradox though. There is a contradiction. If I say, for example, that Ronald McDonald does not exist, I am saying that there is such a being that is called Ronald McDonald, and that being has the characteristic of non-existence, and that does not make sense. If I say that Brother Abu Ahmad exists, he's right here, I cannot say that non-existence is a part of that being itself. Because as soon as I think of something, I think of its being. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first two terminologies that I said, He is wajib al-wujud, He is the necessary existence. He is wahdat al-wujud. He has unity in His being. When I say wajib al-wujud, He is the only thing that of necessity exists. Everything else is mumkin al-wujud. Theoretical existence versus absolute existence. In reality, what this means is that everything else does not really exist. And the only thing that exists is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Please shout to Allah. Everything that exists is كل من عليها فان. Everything that exists will be gone. The only thing that will remain is the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the famous munajat, I believe I said this yesterday as well, in the famous munajat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, أنت الباقي وأنا الفاني. In the munajat that we recite, Maulaya ya Mawla, one of the statements is, أنت الباقي وأنا الفاني. That you are the ever living, ever existing, and I will perish. Death comes to everything except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And indeed, when we talk about these ideas, certain philosophers come to mind. And when we talk about existence, the existence of evil comes to mind. More specifically, can God create evil? First of all, let me backtrack a little bit. The famous Sufi saint, Shahabuddin Sohrawardi. Shahabuddin Sohrawardi was a Sufi saint around the time the Crusades happened. During the time of Salahuddin Ayyubi. He was in Syria. After defeating the Crusaders, Salahuddin felt that there was an attack on Orthodox Sunni Islam by the esoteric Fatimids in Egypt and the Sufis that lived within his kingdom. So when he found out that his son, who was governor of Syria, was influenced by a Sufi saint, he had that Sufi saint killed. Sohrawardi. The reason why I say this is because Sohrawardi produced very few books. But his few books produced a whole different thinking in Islamic philosophy. What they say, he produced the school of Ishraq, illumination, light, where he says Allah is ultimate nur, not like this nur. This is physical light. Allah's nur, we cannot really comprehend. You know, the famous statement is people who are trying to discover God, after they start becoming religious, they say, I found God. My statement about that is that you can never truly find God because God is always greater than what you can imagine him to be. He says, so already, incidentally as a side point, when it comes to the Fala'il of Amir al-Mu'mineen, many Sufis have said this, Shia Mufassirin have said this as well, and Suhrawardi is one of them. In his book, Haylak al-Nur, he says that when you take the Quran and you condense it into one surah, you get Surah Fatiha. You condense that surah into one sentence, you get the Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim of Surah Mubarak al-Fatiha. And once you condense that even more, you get the Ba of Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. You condense that even more, you get the dot, and even the Sufis agree. He says the dot beneath the Ba of Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is the wujud of Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. A second time for the love of Bibi Fatima al-Zahra. So, he produced the idea of what he called the school of Ishraq, where God is ultimate light. God is unity of being. Unity of being cannot create multiplicity. Yani, this ikhtilafat that you see in the creation, the differences you see in the creation, absolute unity can only create absolute unity. So he says Allah did not create this universe. He says everything in this universe, first of all, exists of light. And he says Allah created gradations of light. The first light that he created was Nur Muhammadi. It was part of the Nur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but with lesser intensity. And with this difference, he created all of existence. Evil, however, we believe Allah did not create. We believe Allah did not create evil. What is the proof? In the natural world, there is no such thing as evil. And what do I mean by that? Some people might say, we see a tsunami come into land and it destroys houses and it destroys people's lives, it kills people. A few months ago, there were massive storms raining in Montana and the rivers, they overflooded, they took houses and everything. A few years ago, there was massive rainstorm in Texas, 500-year record. How is this not evil? You see, after every storm in the natural world, you see the propensity of life. Even a natural fire, when it burns down a forest, the next thing you see after the fire is done is that new saplings, they come out of the ground and they populate that same soil that forest had destroyed, or that fire had destroyed. So there's no such thing as evil in the natural world. Human evil is not a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me backtrack. Allah creates absolute goodness. He, as the absolute good, can only create goodness. And the lack of good, meaning the lack of creation, the lack of existence, is evil. Human evil, and we have seen many of this time and time again, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, Saddam, Gaddafi, we see Al-Zahra al-Haq in Pakistan, we see Taliban, we see Salahuddin and everything. But that is not God creating evil. In the human, you see, dear brothers and sisters, Allah gave a system of guidance to all of creation. For animals, it is instinct, and they follow it to the T. When it comes to the ins and the jinn, Allah gave them free will. Meaning that He does not force us to do it. And even in Islamic philosophy, they have discussion as to whether or not God forces evil, which I just said does not happen. But, for example, the Ash'ari will say that God, between Qada and Qadr, absolute predetermination. Where if God, A'udhu Billah, after the sacrifices of Imam al-Hussein, if God had wanted to place Abu Abdullah al-Hussein in hell and Yazid in heaven, he could do that. That's what they say. They say that. And that was the reason why the Banu Umayyah promoted this ideology. If I believe that the tyrant is given power by God, I will be quiet. On the other hand, the Ash'ari was this group that I just said. The other hand was the Mu'tazili, who believed in absolute free will. And the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, they said neither this nor that, but a path between the two paths. Meaning Allah creates all the possibilities of our life, and we choose the actuality. God did not predetermine us to attend the Majalis of Imam Hussein. We chose that. He created all the possibilities of everything we could do, and we chose that path. God does not tell you become a doctor. You choose that path. God does not tell you to become a physician or an engineer. You choose that path. Yes, when we say a path between the two paths, that means that there are certain things Allah has predetermined for us, and certain things He has left for free will. And of course, the greatest blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the majalis of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Yesterday I mentioned that to be an arif, you need fiqh, you need akhlaq, and then you go to irfan. To be a good human being is what's all that is required to tread the path of Muhammad, dear brothers and sisters. And as Shia, as followers of the school of Ahlul Bayt, as Ja'fari, we believe in the Ghaibat al-Kubra, the Niyabat al-Aam of the Marja'iyah. And indeed, when you go meet Sistani, I've heard, I haven't met him myself, but when he meets the youth, he says, go to a specialty. Become a doctor, become an engineer, become a physician, become a pharmacist. He says this. When I went first time to Najaf, we met Ayatollah al-Uzma Ishaq Fayaz. Very beautiful city. It was a student group, about 100 students. And he said something very beautiful. He says, right now, as students, your goal should be to get the highest grade that you can possibly get. And he says you should put your highest emphasis on your studies. You know why? He says for prayer, if you miss the time of prayer, you can always offer qada, but the hour you lose for not studying, there's no qada for that. So become scientists, become all of that. The reason why I'm saying this is because science itself is important. I believe, personally speaking, that Islamic science, not fiqh or usul, I'm talking about Islamic natural sciences, have the answers to all the problems of this human being. When they say that this world, I forget which Imam said this, or even if the Prophet said this, but they say that from Ahlul Bayt they have said this world has the complete sustenance to take care of everybody within it. Meaning I don't have to go put toxins in my body and then go to a doctor because my body is having a bad reaction to it. And he gives me a medication that only solves part of the problem. Let's say, and I hope this never happens to anybody, but somebody has a heart problem. And the doctor, what they recommend? Medication to solve the heart problem. Or people with, and then in some of the sciences they are better. With heart problems, they will say, not just the medication, change your diet, change your food, change your intake and everything. I was just, in my field, I study Islamic chaplaincy, but my field, I like psychiatric chaplaincy. So I read all of these books all the time. I was reading this book about mental health, and the author, 2000, she says, look, we put so many toxins inside our body, and we then say that our body should not react to it. What is caffeine? These sodas, these coffees, these, even when we buy fruit, they put preservatives, these fertilizers, these are all toxins. And then we accept the doctor give us a nuskha to solve our problem, and we take the medication, and the medication increases. Why? Because we forgot that the main purpose of Islamic medical sciences is to connect man back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To make somebody feel wholly human again. To go back to that source of guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided for us. Indeed, Islamic philosophy of science is of a higher grade. But now we are talking about education, and I talked about the youth. I want to talk to the parents for a little bit now. Because when we say, as a parent, that to the child, experience the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your life, you as the representative of Allah in the family have to show your children that you love them. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Second time for the love of Fatima al-Zahra. Imam Ali says, tell your daughters you love them, because if you do not say that, they will go to the attention of other men. As a human parent, and I am a child too, sometimes love has to be hard love. But tell them you love them. Why? Because once you tell them you love them, you are really saying Allah loves you. Allah loves you. Create the environment within the family system that they don't have to learn anything, they automatically absorb everything that you teach them in the household. The famous statement, and I'll go back to history a little bit, about Sayyidah Zainab salamullahi alayha. Imam al-Sajjad says, Anti alimatu ghayri mu'allama. She was the alima who was not taught. Imam Ali didn't teach Bibi Zainab, that's what that means. Bibi Fatima did not actually sit with Bibi Zainab and teach her Islam. The environment in the house was so conducive to the education of the child that she automatically absorbed everything. And look at what she absorbed. I'm going to go back now to her ancestors, Bibi Khadija. The first woman to accept Islam, richest lady in the Arabian Peninsula. In Hijaz, richest lady in all of Hijaz. She married Rasulullah. He starts getting wahi. She says, you are a prophet. She is the first lady to recite the kalima. The Shahadatain, she is the first person to recite that. And she gives everything to her husband. Everything. So much so that when they are in Shayb Abu Talib, when they're being barricaded, and Bibi Khadija leaves this world, Prophet Muhammad does not have enough money to buy her a kafan. And Jibreel comes and gives him 5 kafan. In the Musibah they recite, one was for Bibi Khadija, the other for Prophet Muhammad, the other for Amir al-Mu'mineen and Fatima al-Zahra, and the 5th one was for Imam al-Hassan. And not Musibah yet, I have some time, maybe 5 minutes inshallah. Then the Prophet asks, what about the kafan for Hussein? He says, he will die without kafan. But look, she was the richest lady in Arabia. She died poor. And Bibi Fatima, she sees this, she's only 4 or 5 years old when her mother dies. She picks up that same standard and she takes care of the Prophet to such an extent, the Prophet says she is the mother of her father. Meaning she took care of the Prophet not only the way Bibi Khadija would have, but the way Bibi Fatima did as the mother of her own father. First lady to accept Islam, first daughter of Islam. Bibi Fatima. Bibi Fatima, and I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, Bibi Zainab is only 4 years old when Bibi Fatima becomes Shaheed. Bibi Fatima is only, 18 years old. And what happens? And I mentioned this yesterday too. I don't want to rehash what I said yesterday, but take that khutbah fadakiyah. I've heard scholars say that the only person that has narrated this khutbah fadakiyah is Sayyidina Zainab sallallahu alayha. And she was only 4 or 5. Route memorization. Route memorization. To create that environment, dear brothers and sisters. The hadith say that the mind of a child is like fertile soil. You put it, you sow whatever you reap. Put that idea of the love of Allah Muhammad in your children's hearts. Give them the respect to make moral decisions for themselves. When they go to school, make sure that they do well in school, because they have to become the doctor, right? Saint Islam says, become a doctor, engineer, professional. Become a teacher, professor, dean, chancellor, all of that. Because when you become that is a whole different world you're operating in. Imagine now if we had a Shia dean of Harvard University, what a big change that would be. My favorite philosopher of the modern times is Hussein Nasr. And he lives in America. He says more than doctors need professors, deans, chancellors, presidents of universities. Why? Because when our children, they go to these universities, they see all types of things. If they see a Muslim at this high position of power and influence, that will have an effect on their lives. That will have an effect on their life. And indeed, I'm expanding it even more. Every science, every ilm that is needed for the success of society, in Islam they say is wujub al-kifaya. Wajib al-kifaya, general obligation on everybody. If a few people do it, it satisfies the obligation for everybody else. Every knowledge that you try to gain in this world, if it's for the betterment of the Islamic community, it's wajib al-kifaya. Please say it. Yesterday we talked about Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wassalam leaving the city of Medina. The night that Marwan ibn Hakam and Yazid, his father Muawiyah, had died, and Yazid ordered the governor of Medina to get bay'ah from Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. They say Abu Abdullah al-Hussein spent the whole night at his grandfather's grave. He spent the whole night at Rasulullah's grave. He spent the whole night on the grave of Rasulullah. He cried and he cried and he cried. So much so that they say he fell asleep. Some say he passed out, but they say he fell asleep. In his dream, he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. Rasulullah was saying to him, "Oh Hussein, Hussein, Allah has a position for you in the paradise that you cannot attain except through Shahada." Imam al-Hussein wakes up, he is satisfied with this decision. He goes to perform Hajj. He goes to perform Hajj on the day of Arafah. He makes the change in his journey to go towards Kufa. He sends his brother, his cousin Muslim ibn Aqil to Kufa to survey that situation. And they say on the way to Kufa, Muslim ibn Aqil, he took his 2 sons, Muhammad and Ibrahim, with him. They say that Muslim ibn Aqil became Shaheed. Muslim ibn Aqil became Shaheed. Before his Shahada, he had written a letter to Abu Abdullah al-Hussein Originally, when he came to Kufa, there were many people who did bay'ah of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein on the hands of Muslim ibn Aqil. When Yazid had found this out, he sent Ibn Ziyad la'natullah alayh there to Kufa. Ibn Ziyad, as he entered the city of Kufa, Muslim ibn Aqil was reciting salat. There were hundreds of people behind him. There were dozens of people behind him. They say that Ibn Ziyad had a niqab on his face when he moved to the city center. They say he took off the niqab, and the people who thought it was Imam Hussein at that time, they see it was Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. Muslim ibn Aqil, who had dozens of people behind him when he started the prayer. When he finishes the prayer, this is only a handful of people praying behind him. Long story short, dear brothers and sisters, I don't want to recite the Shahadat of Muslim, but when Muslim went to Kufa, he says that he wrote a letter to Imam Hussein saying, come. And when he got captured, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad asked them, tell me, Muslim, do you have a single request? He says, yes, I have a few requests. He says, first, I have to owe some money to some people. Give them this amount of money and pay off my debt. And second of all, tell my master Hussein not to come to Kufa. Because the people of Kufa, their hearts are with you, but their swords are against you. Ibn Ziyad says, I will not grant you your wish. Imam al-Hussein is on his way to the city of Kufa, and he finds out he gets intercepted by a man from Kufa. He asks him the situation in Kufa. He says, Muslim ibn Aqil, my master, Muslim ibn Aqil has been slaughtered. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he diverts his direction to Karbala. Hud ibn Yazid al-Riyahi is following Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, making sure that he does not go to a place of any city. When he reaches the plains of Karbala, they say that the Zunjana, the Murtajis, the horse of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein stopped. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he stopped. He could hear the cries of Sayyidina Zainab salamullahi alayha. He stopped and he gathered all the people in Karbala. He says, what is the name of this place? Someone says Nainawa, someone says Maria. After all the names, someone says, Ya Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, this place is also known as Karbala. Ya Abu Abdullah al-Hussein knows this place really well. Every prophet, we believe in the school of Ahlul Bayt, went to Karbala, and every prophet suffered in Karbala. Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, if you go to Karbala, you see the haram of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein and Abu Fadl al-Abbas, and you see the place where all the martyrs are buried. You see the Zari of Habib ibn Malahir. You see Ali Akbar is buried by Imam Hussein, and you see that. But they say Imam Hussein had bought this land from the people of Karbala, and he gave it back to them. He says to them, he calls all the men in the morning time after Fajr. He says to them, look, I am Hussein, I am the son of your prophet, I'm the grandson of your prophet. A few days from now, all my family members, all the male members of my family and my ashab will become shaheed. If you do not join me, at least do us the favor that after this happens, you will come and bury us. They say, he says to them, at Dhuhr time, bring all the women. And they brought all the women. Imam Hussein addresses the women saying, look, after a few days, my whole family will become shaheed in this holy land. All my ashab will be killed. All my ashab will be killed. If your husbands do not have the courage to come bury us, you force them to come and bury us. Then he says at Maghrib time, at night time, bring all the children. Bring all the children. Dear brothers and sisters, you know what Abu Abdullah Hussein says? He says to the children the same thing. A few days from now, all my family members, all the male members of my family, all of my ashab will be killed. If your parents don't have the courage or the strength to come bury us, you come pretend that you're playing and you drop some dirt on our bodies to make sure that we have some type of a burial. Dear brothers and sisters, about Abdullah al-Hussein, they say that he had set up his tent near the riverbank that was forcibly removed. After the 10th of Muharram, this tribe, which was a part of the Bani Asad, they had realized that Abu Abdullah al-Hussein was Shaheed, and that everything that had happened, that Imam Hussein told them would predicted, had happened. And they remembered the promise they made Imam al-Hussein. Imam al-Sajjad is in chains right now. They're trying to bring him to Kufa. They say they went to the Qatlgah, they went to the places of the martyrdom of the Sahaba of Imam Hussein and his family members. They tried to see what they could do. They could not recognize them. None of the bodies had heads on them. Imam Hussein's body did not have a kafan, did not have clothes on it. They could not recognize any one of the bodies. So they say by way of mu'ajiza, Imam al-Sajjad came. He says, wait, look, now you need my help. I will tell you whose bodies these are, and you bury them. They say they dug up one big ditch to bury most of the Sahaba and the family members of Imam al-Hussein. They had a separate grave for Habib ibn Madahir. Even when you go to Karbala today, in the valley of Imam al-Hussein, in the haram of Imam al-Hussein, there is a grave for Habib ibn Madahir. Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas got a separate burial. Ali Akbar got a separate burial. When they came to bury Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, they say that Imam al-Sajjad says, I have to do this, but don't close the grave yet. After all the tents had been burned, Imam al-Sajjad went to the back of where the tents used to be, and he picked up a 6-month-old body. And he picked up the 6-month-old body of Abdullah al-Radi Ali Asghar. He goes to his father's grave. The famous Pakistani Khatib Maulana Muntazir Abbas used to say that Imam Zainul Abidin said to Asghar, Asghar, what are you doing sleeping alone? From now on, Sakina will be sleeping with our mother Rubab. I place you next to the body of our father Hussein so that you can sleep on his chest for eternity. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Sayalamu alladhina zalamu wa yawma yanqalimun. Mata min Hussein.
Ya Hussein!